Alexander Kingsley had everything a man could possibly want. Money that no longer had numbers, influence that bent laws quietly, and a surname that opened doors before he even knocked. Yet on the morning the sun rose behind the glass towers of Victoria Island, he felt a restlessness that wealth had never been able to cure. From the balcony of his penthouse, the city of Lagos stretched endlessly below him. Alive, impatient, chaotic, beautiful. Cars honked like they were in a competition. Street vendors shouted with hope in their voices. Somewhere down there, people were struggling, dreaming, cheating, loving, surviving. And somewhere among them were the people he had trusted with his newest empire. Kingsley Crown Bank. The building stood proudly a few blocks away, its glass walls catching the sunlight like a jewel. It was the result of 5 years of planning, millions of dollars, and countless sleepless nights. For Alexander, it was more than a bank. It was meant to be his legacy, the clean institution his late father never lived long enough to build. But peace refused to settle in his chest. On the marble table behind him lay a slim brown file. He didn't need to open it again. He already knew its contents by heart. Anonymous emails. Whispers from background investigators. A quiet warning from a former rival turned ally. Some of your staff are dirty already. Even before the official opening. Alexander closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. They don't even know I'm watching, he muttered. He turned back into the living room, where the silence felt heavy despite the expensive art and soft music playing in the background. On the wall hung a large black and white photograph of his father, tall, stern, with eyes that looked like they could see straight through lies. His father, Henry Kingsley, had built his fortune from nothing. No inheritance, no shortcuts, just discipline, principles, and a deep belief that character mattered more than competence. Alexander walked closer to the photograph. You always said money exposes people, he said quietly. I didn't believe you enough. A memory stirred, his father's voice, calm but firm. Son, if you want to know who deserves power, remove it and watch how they behave. Alexander straightened. That was it. Board meetings wouldn't reveal the truth. Background checks could be forged. Smiles and suits meant nothing. If he wanted to know who his staff truly were, he needed to become invisible. The idea would have sounded insane to anyone else. A billionaire, one of the youngest bank owners in West Africa, pretending to be a homeless cleaner? But the more Alexander thought about it, the more right it felt. No security escort. No name recognition. No fear in people's eyes. Just raw human behavior. He moved with purpose now, opening his walk-in closet. Expensive suits lined the racks, Italian, British, custom-made. He ignored them all and walked to the back, where an old duffel bag sat untouched for years. Inside were clothes he had once worn during his university days, before the money exploded, before the name carried weight. He pulled out a faded brown shirt, loose trousers with frayed hems, and a pair of worn rubber slippers. He paused, then deliberately rubbed dust into the fabric. At the bathroom mirror, he stared at his reflection. Too clean, too sharp. He picked up a razor and shaved his beard unevenly, leaving patches that made him look older, tired, forgotten. He rubbed a bit of ash under his eyes and messed up his hair. The man staring back at him no longer looked like Alexander Kingsley. He looked like someone people wouldn't notice. Good. By 6:30 a.m., a small white bus stopped near the back entrance of Kingsley Crown Bank. A few cleaners stepped down, chatting lazily. Alexander joined them silently. No one asked his name. No one cared. Inside the building, the smell of fresh paint and polished marble filled the air. The bank was pristine, too clean, too perfect. Alexander picked up a broom and began sweeping near the entrance. Each stroke of the broom felt symbolic. I built this, he thought. Now let's see what you've turned it into. Staff began arriving. Men in sharp suits. Women in high heels and expensive perfumes. Laughter loud, confidence careless. Some looked at him with irritation. Some looked through him entirely. A man nearly bumped into him and hissed, "Watch where you're sweeping, old man." Alexander bowed his head slightly. "Sorry, sir." The words tasted strange in his mouth, but necessary. He was no longer the owner. He was nobody. As the morning buzz grew louder, Alexander noticed something else. How quickly power shifted. Supervisors barked orders at cleaners. Managers insulted junior staff openly. Security men demanded appreciation from customers already lining up. And then, "Good morning, sir." The voice was gentle. Female. Alexander looked up. She stood behind one of the teller counters, adjusting her chair. She wasn't flashy. No heavy makeup. No exaggerated smile. Just calm eyes and a warmth that didn't feel rehearsed. Her name tag read, Amara Bello. She smiled again when he met her gaze. Something about that smile felt real. Alexander nodded awkwardly. "Good morning." She watched him for a second longer than necessary, then returned to her work. Alexander continued sweeping, but his heartbeat had changed rhythm. He didn't know it yet, but that simple greeting would become the most important moment of his carefully planned test. As the glass doors slid open and the first customers walked in, Alexander tightened his grip on the broom. The experiment had begun, and so had something far more dangerous than corruption. The sound of the bank coming alive was different from anything Alexander had ever experienced. As the hidden owner, he had imagined this place as numbers, projections, security systems, and profit margins. But standing there with a broom in his hand, invisible and ignored, he finally heard the heartbeat of Kingsley Crown Bank, the soft hum of air conditioners, the click of heels on marble floors, the rustle of expensive suits, the low murmur of power being exercised casually. Alexander swept slowly near the entrance, careful not to draw attention to himself. The marble floors shone so brightly they reflected the ceiling lights, but no one seemed to notice the man responsible for keeping them that way. A group of junior staff walked past him, laughing loudly. "If you don't shine your eye in this place, you'll suffer," one of them said. Another laughed. "Guy, I didn't come here to be poor." They didn't lower their voices. They didn't care who heard. Alexander noted it quietly. By 8:15 a.m., the supervisors arrived, already irritated. "Why is the floor wet here?" a woman snapped, pointing sharply at a spot Alexander had just cleaned. "I'll wipe it again, madam," he said calmly. She rolled her eyes. "You people and sense don't live on the same street." The words were casual, cruel, normal. Alexander bowed slightly and returned to work, but his chest tightened. This was how culture was built, not by policies but by behavior repeated daily without consequences. From his corner, he watched the tellers settle in. Then he noticed her again. Amara Bello. She moved with quiet efficiency, arranging her workstation carefully. She greeted her fellow tellers with a nod, not loud or dramatic, but polite. When the first customer approached her counter, an elderly man struggling with forms, she stood up immediately. "Good morning, sir. Let me help you," she said gently. Alexander slowed his sweeping. The man looked relieved. "Thank you, my daughter. My eyes are not very good." She took the form, explained each section patiently, and never once glanced at the growing queue behind him. When another teller sighed loudly nearby, Amara ignored it. "Take your time," she told the man. "No rush." Alexander felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Respect. As the morning progressed, the bank grew busier. Alexander moved toward the waiting area, pretending to clean but actually observing. Two security officers stood near the entrance. A well-dressed woman walked in, clutching a brown envelope. One of the guards leaned closer. "Madam, you know say today go busy. If you drop something small, I fit help you enter fast." The woman hesitated, then slipped some money into his palm. The guard smiled and waved her in. Alexander felt his jaw tighten. Barely 2 hours into operation and already bribery. He scribbled the time and description in his mind. At the customer service desk, a supervisor scolded a young staff member harshly. "You think this is your father's shop? If you mess up again, I'll make sure you're transferred to a village branch." The young man nodded rapidly, eyes downcast. Alexander wanted to intervene. He didn't. This was the test. Around noon, the heat intensified, and so did the tension. A manager walked briskly toward Alexander. "Cleaner." Alexander straightened. "Yes, sir. Why are you sweeping here? Can't you see customers are sitting?" "I'll finish quickly, sir." The man sneered. "You people always want to be noticed. Just disappear. Disappear." Alexander swallowed the word and stepped back. He moved toward the staff restroom to refill his bucket. As he did, he overheard two senior officers speaking in hushed tones near the hallway. "Did you hear the owner might show up unannounced someday?" One laughed. "A beg. These rich men don't mix with workers. He'll send emails from abroad." The other smirked. "As long as he's not here, we're safe." Alexander froze. Safe from what? Their laughter echoed as they walked away. He clenched his fists so tightly his nails dug into his palms. So confident. So careless. During lunch break, most staff gathered in small groups, discussing bonuses, weekend plans, and office gossip. Alexander sat behind the building, eating plain bread and water, just like the other cleaners. Then he sensed someone nearby. "Sir, please take this." He looked up. It was Amara. She held out a neatly wrapped food pack. "I noticed you didn't go to the canteen," she said softly. Alexander stared at the food. No one had offered him food without expecting something in return in a very long time. "I'm fine," he said reflexively. She smiled gently. "It's okay. I brought extra." After a pause, he accepted it. "Thank you," he said quietly. She sat on a low step a short distance away, not too close, not awkward. "First day?" she asked. He nodded. "People here can be a lot," she added carefully. "Don't let it get to you." Alexander chuckled softly. "You speak like you've learned the hard way." She sighed. "I have." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she stood. "Take care, sir." And just like that, she walked away. Alexander opened the food pack. Rice, stew, protein. Simple. Yet it felt heavier than gold. Back inside, chaos erupted near the counters. A customer accused a teller of shortchanging him. Voices rose. Supervisors rushed over. Amara stepped forward calmly. "Let's check the transaction history," she said. Within minutes, she proved the teller innocent and apologized to the customer without ego. The tension dissolved. Alexander watched her with admiration. She didn't seek praise. She didn't brag. She simply did what was right. As the day ended, Alexander leaned on his broom near the entrance. Staff filed out, tired, still talking loudly. Some avoided eye contact with him. Some didn't even see him. Amara passed by last. "Good evening, sir," she said. "Good evening," he replied. She paused. "See you tomorrow." Alexander nodded. He watched her walk away, her silhouette disappearing into the evening crowd. For the first time since stepping into his own bank as a nobody, Alexander felt conflicted. The corruption hurt, but it didn't surprise him. What surprised him was how deeply one honest soul had affected him. This test was no longer just about loyalty. It was about truth. And somewhere between marble floors and quiet kindness, Alexander Kingsley felt something dangerous beginning to grow. By the third morning, Alexander no longer needed effort to disappear. The security guards no longer noticed him. The supervisors no longer corrected him. The manager spoke freely in his presence. Invisibility, he learned, was not a curse. It was a privilege. He arrived earlier than usual, long before the first customer. The bank was quiet, echoing with the hollow sound of his broom against the marble floor. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and ambition. As he swept past the customer service desks, he noticed two junior staff whispering urgently. "You hear say the audit team fit come this month?" The other scoffed. "Audit? For what?" "Everything done already a line." Alexander slowed his steps. "A line how?" The first leaned closer. "Olga James handles the files. Madam Ruth signs. Nothing go trace back." They laughed softly. Alexander's stomach tightened. He swept closer to the counter where Amara usually sat. She hadn't arrived yet, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he found himself looking forward to her presence every morning. In this strange double life he was living, she was the only thing that felt steady. At exactly 8:02 a.m., she walked in. Simple blue dress, flat shoes, hair neatly packed. "Good morning," she greeted the cleaners as she passed. Not just him. All of them. Alexander watched the other cleaners straighten a little under her kindness. Power, he realized, didn't have to shout. The bank opened, and within minutes the hall buzzed with activity. A middle-aged man in an expensive agbada approached one of the account officers, speaking in low tones. Alexander pretended to wipe the glass wall nearby. "Don't worry," the officer said confidently. "We'll process it quietly." "But it's urgent," the man insisted. "I need it today. It will cost extra." "How much?" The officer smiled. "We'll talk later." Alexander felt anger rise in his chest. This wasn't just bad behavior. It was a system. Mid-morning brought trouble. A young woman at Amara's counter burst into tears. "They said I must pay something before my loan can be approved," she sobbed. "But I already met all the requirements." Amara frowned and pulled up the file. "That's not correct," she said firmly. "There's no such fee." The woman sniffed. But the officer upstairs said. Amara stood. "Please wait here." She walked briskly toward the office of one of the senior account managers, Mr. James. Alexander watched from afar. Inside the glass office, voices rose. "You're embarrassing me," James snapped. "I'm protecting the bank," Amara replied calmly. "We can't demand illegal fees." James leaned back, smirking. "You're still young here. Learn how things work." She didn't flinch. "I know how things work, and this isn't right." James' smile vanished. "You think you're better than us?" "No," she said. "I think honesty matters." The conversation ended abruptly. Amara returned to her counter, face pale but composed. Alexander felt something shift inside him. Courage. Pure, quiet courage. By lunchtime, the tension had spread. Whispers followed Amara. "She's forming holy," someone muttered. "She'll soon learn." Alexander sat behind the building again, eating his bread. Amara approached, hesitating. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She forced a smile. "I will be." He studied her face. "You did the right thing." She looked surprised. "You heard." He nodded. She sighed and sat beside him. "Sometimes I wonder if being good is a disadvantage." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her. "If goodness becomes rare," he said slowly, "then it becomes powerful." She smiled sadly. "I hope you're right." That afternoon, Alexander witnessed something that made his blood boil. A supervisor accused a cleaner of stealing a phone. The cleaner, a frail older man, denied it desperately. "I didn't take anything." The supervisor slapped the desk. "Search him." Alexander stepped forward. "He didn't steal it," he said calmly. The supervisor turned on him. "And how would you know?" Alexander met his eyes. "Because I saw the phone fall behind the counter." Silence. The phone was found exactly where he said. The supervisor scoffed. "Next time, mind your business." But something had changed. Eyes were on him now. Late in the day, Alexander overheard two managers talking near the vault area. "The owner won't notice small leakages," one said. "He's too big for details." The other laughed. "As long as the reports look clean." Alexander felt a cold calm settle over him. They had underestimated him. Gravely, as closing time approached, Amara was called into the HR office. When she returned, her hands were shaking. "What happened?" Alexander asked quietly as she passed. "They warned me," she whispered. "Said I should cooperate or risk my job." Alexander's chest tightened. That night, alone in his penthouse, he replayed everything. The insults, the bribes, the cruelty, the courage. He opened a secure folder on his laptop and began compiling evidence. Names, times, patterns. This was no longer an experiment. It was a reckoning, and Amara Bello, without knowing it, had become the line between what would be destroyed and what would be saved. By the fourth day, Alexander stopped pretending this was only observation. It was no longer enough to watch corruption unfold. He needed to measure it, to see how far people were willing to go when temptation was placed directly in their hands. So he created temptation. The morning began like every other. Marble floors gleaming, air conditioning humming, staff walking in with the confidence of people who believed the building belonged to them more than the unseen owner ever could. Alexander arrived early, dressed in his familiar disguise, creased trousers, faded shirt, worn slippers. He swept slowly near the customer service desks, eyes alert, mind sharp. At exactly 9:10 a.m., he made his first move. He walked deliberately through the waiting area and, accidentally, let a thick brown wallet slip from his pocket. It landed with a soft thud. He continued walking. He didn't have to wait long. A junior account officer noticed it first. He glanced around quickly, bent down, picked up the wallet, and slipped it into his jacket without hesitation. Alexander watched, heart sinking. Minutes later, a supervisor spotted another bundle of cash Alexander had subtly dropped near the printers. She gasped softly. "Oh!" She picked it up, looked around, then walked briskly toward the manager's office. Alexander followed at a distance. Inside the office, the supervisor laughed nervously. "Sir, see what I found. It must be the cleaners." The manager opened it. His eyes widened. "Why is a cleaner carrying this kind of money?" he asked slowly. They exchanged a look. "Maybe he stole it," the supervisor suggested. The manager smiled thinly. "Or maybe we can help him keep it." They both laughed. Alexander felt something cold settle in his chest. Then came the moment he hadn't planned but would never forget. Amara found the third wallet. She had just finished attending to a customer when she noticed it near her counter. She picked it up, opened it, and froze when she saw the money inside. She didn't smile. She didn't hesitate. She stood up immediately and scanned the hall until her eyes found Alexander sweeping near the entrance. She walked toward him, ignoring the curious stares. "Sir," she said quietly, "is this yours?" Alexander nodded. "Yes." She handed it to him without opening it again. "You should be careful. That's a lot of money," he said, watching her carefully. She met his gaze. "That's why it should be returned." Then she turned and walked back to her counter. No performance, no pride, just principle. Alexander's throat tightened. By afternoon, the rumors began. "Why is that teller always returning things? She's too righteous. She thinks she's better than everyone." Alexander overheard it all. He also noticed how Amara was slowly being excluded. Conversation stopping when she approached, laughter dying abruptly, eyes rolling behind her back. Integrity, he realized, came with a price, and she was paying it alone. Later that day, he set another test. He pretended to struggle with a heavy trash bag near the vault corridor. 2 security men watched lazily. "I beg help me," Alexander said softly. One guard sighed. "Old man, shift." The other guard leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you want access here, say nothing free." Alexander pretended not to understand. The guard smiled. "Drop something small." Alexander shook his head. "I don't have." The guard scoffed. "Then move." Everything was being documented. Everything. At closing time, Amara stayed behind to balance her records. Alexander lingered nearby. "You should go home," he said gently. She sighed. "I just want everything to be right." He studied her face, tired but unbroken. "Do you ever regret being honest?" he asked. She paused. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Especially when I see dishonest people rewarded." He nodded slowly. "Then why keep doing it?" She looked at him. "Because if I stop, I won't recognize myself anymore." Something broke open in Alexander's chest. He had built empires, but he had never built this kind of character. That night, Alexander sat in his penthouse, suit jacket discarded, disguise gone. The city lights blinked outside his window, indifferent. He replayed the day again and again. The thefts, the laughter, the casual evil, and Amara standing alone in quiet resistance. He opened his laptop and expanded the evidence folder. Then he paused. For the first time since this plan began, fear crept in. Not fear of exposure. Fear of losing her when the truth came out. Because when the mask dropped, everything would change. And he wasn't sure she would forgive the lie. The next morning, the pressure intensified. HR sent Amara a formal warning letter. Non-cooperation. Disruptive behavior. Alexander watched her read it, her hands trembling. She didn't cry. She folded the paper neatly and placed it in her bag. During lunch, she didn't come outside. Alexander found her alone at her desk, staring at the screen. "You're being punished for doing right," he said quietly. She smiled sadly. "Story of my life." He wanted to tell her everything. He didn't. Not yet. By the end of the day, Alexander knew one thing for certain. Kingsley Crown Bank was sick, and Amara Bello was the rare medicine it didn't deserve, but desperately needed. The trap was tightening, and soon, the truth would come crashing down on everyone who thought power made them untouchable. By the fifth day, Kingsley Crown Bank no longer felt like a place of work. Felt like a battlefield. Alexander sensed it the moment he stepped into the building that morning. The air was tense. Voices lower, movements sharper, eyes more watchful. The people who had grown comfortable in their dishonesty were beginning to feel threatened, though none of them could explain why. Corruption, he realized, had instincts, and it knew it was being watched. He swept past the customer service desks as usual, head bowed, ears open. Near the elevators, a cluster of senior staff whispered urgently. "The audit notice came too fast," one said. "It's fake," another replied confidently. "HR arranged it, just to scare people." Alexander paused. "Fake audit?" He moved closer, pretending to wipe fingerprints from the glass. "Still," a woman said nervously, "that teller Amara, she's the problem. She asks too many questions." James' voice cut in cold and precise. "Then we remove the problem." Alexander's heart thudded heavily. By mid-morning, the so-called audit began. 2 men in suits arrived, flashing badges and walking with authority. Staff stiffened instantly. Files were pulled out. Computers were shut down and reopened nervously. The managers wore their most professional smiles. Alexander watched carefully. The auditors didn't inspect the real systems. They asked the wrong questions. They focused on junior staff. They avoided certain offices entirely. It was theater, a performance designed to identify who was dangerous, not what was wrong. And Amara Bello was the target. She was called into a small conference room just before lunch. Alexander watched her walk in, shoulders squared, expression calm. He followed quietly, positioning himself near the corridor, close enough to hear raised voices through the half-closed door. "You processed this transaction, didn't you?" one auditor asked sharply. "Yes," Amara replied. "It was verified and approved." "Then why does the system show a discrepancy?" "There shouldn't be one." James' voice joined in smoothly. "Unless it was altered afterward." Silence followed. Alexander's blood ran cold. "That's a serious accusation," Amara said quietly. James sighed dramatically. "Amara, no one wants trouble. Just admit the mistake and we'll resolve it internally." "I didn't make a mistake," she said firmly. Alexander clenched his fists. This was it. They were framing her. Within an hour, whispers spread through the bank. "Did you hear? They said she manipulated accounts." "I knew she was pretending to be holy." Alexander felt physically ill as he watched people who had accepted bribes openly now look at Amara with smug judgment. She emerged from the conference room pale but composed, her eyes glassy but defiant. She returned to her counter and kept working. That alone nearly broke him. The final blow came in the afternoon. HR summoned Amara again. This time there was no discussion. She was handed a suspension letter. Pending investigation. Effective immediately. Alexander stood by the entrance, broom forgotten, as she packed her things quietly. No one spoke for her. No one defended her. Some avoided her eyes. Some watched with thinly veiled satisfaction. As she passed Alexander, she stopped. I guess goodness finally caught up with me, she said softly. He wanted to scream. Instead, he said, "This isn't the end." She smiled faintly. "For me, it feels like it is." Then she walked out. Alexander remained standing long after the doors closed behind her. Something inside him snapped. That evening, back in his penthouse, Alexander ripped off his tie and threw it across the room. The disguise lay discarded on the floor, meaningless now. He paced like a caged animal. They had crossed a line. This was no longer about loyalty tests or observation. They had attacked the one person who embodied everything the bank was supposed to stand for. And they had done it confidently, because they believed he was absent, because they believed he was weak, because they believed power was theirs. Alexander opened his laptop and pulled up the evidence folder. It was massive now. Bribes, extortion, forgery, harassment, illegal account manipulation. Enough to shut down the bank permanently. Enough to ruin lives. His finger hovered over the send button to regulators, law enforcement, the media. One click. Everything would burn. He stopped. Images of Amara flashed in his mind. Her quiet smile, her tired eyes, the way she defended strangers without hesitation. If he destroyed the bank now, she would be collateral damage. She would never know the truth. She would leave thinking integrity failed her. Alexander closed his eyes. "No," he whispered. "Not like this." The next morning, he returned to the bank as the cleaner. But this time, he was done pretending. He moved deliberately, positioning himself near the HR office, near James' office, near every place where lies were traded freely. The confidence among the corrupt had grown. "She's gone," one supervisor said smugly. "Peace at last." James laughed. "People like her don't last in real institutions." Alexander swept past them slowly. "Enjoy it," he thought, "while it lasts." At noon, he slipped into a restroom stall and made a call. "Prepare the boardroom," he said calmly. "Tomorrow morning. No delays." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, are you sure?" "Yes." He hung up. That evening, Alexander went to the charity center where he knew Amara volunteered. He stayed across the street, watching her help children with homework, her laughter gentle but strained. He didn't approach. Not yet. Soon, he promised himself. Soon, the truth would come out. And when it did, Kingsley Crown Bank would never be the same again. The night air outside the charity center was cool, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and laughter from nearby streets. Alexander remained across the road, leaning against his car, watching through the open windows as Amara moved from child to child with a patience that seemed endless. She had lost her job that morning, yet here she was, smiling for others. Alexander felt a pressure in his chest that no business failure had ever caused. He had survived hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, and political blackmail without flinching. But watching Amara give pieces of herself away while carrying her own pain broke him in a way he didn't know how to defend against. He waited until she stepped outside, her bag slung over one shoulder, her posture tired. "Amara!" She turned, surprised. For a brief moment, she looked relieved, then guarded. "Sir," she said, "you followed me?" "I was worried," he replied honestly. She studied his face. The uneven beard, the tired eyes, the worn clothes. The man the world ignored. "You didn't have to," she said softly. "I wanted to." She nodded slowly and gestured toward a bench nearby. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy with words neither of them knew how to begin. Finally, she spoke. "They suspended me today." "I know." She smiled faintly. "Of course you do. You see everything." Alexander swallowed. "They framed you." Her shoulders stiffened. "You don't know that." "I do." She turned to him sharply. "How?" He hesitated. The truth burned on his tongue. I've been paying attention," he said carefully. She sighed. "That's the problem. I paid attention too." She looked up at the sky. "I thought if I just kept doing right, things would correct themselves." "They still can," he said. She laughed bitterly. You sound like someone who hasn't been disappointed enough. Alexander flinched. If only she knew. They walked slowly down the street afterward, side by side. Streetlights cast long shadows ahead of them. Why do you help here? Alexander asked. She shrugged. It reminds me that the world isn't only cruel. He nodded. And if it is? Then someone has to push back. She stopped walking and looked at him. You do that too, she said. He blinked. Me? Yes. You speak up. You notice things. You defended that cleaner. You didn't take advantage of my kindness. She smiled gently. Most people would have. Her words pierced him. He had spent his life being valued for what he owned, not who he was. And now, stripped of everything, he was being seen. They reached her bus stop. She turned to him. I don't know what will happen next. You'll land on your feet, he said firmly. She studied him. You believe that? With everything in me. A beat. Why? She asked softly. Because I will make sure you do. But he couldn't say it. Because I believe in you, he said instead. Her eyes softened. Thank you, she whispered. She boarded the bus, turning back once to wave. Alexander stood there long after it pulled away. That night he barely slept. The next morning at the bank, the atmosphere was electric. Staff were summoned abruptly. Emails flew. Security was increased. The boardroom was prepared. Alexander returned in disguise one last time. He moved through the halls with a sense of finality, memorizing faces, expressions, confidence that would soon crumble. James laughed loudly in his office. HR staff congratulated each other. Supervisors strutted. They thought they had won. Alexander felt no satisfaction, only resolve. Midday, he overheard two managers talking. Tomorrow's board meeting routine, ABI? Yes, just formalities. They laughed. Alexander smiled faintly. Formalities indeed. Later that afternoon, he found Amara's suspension file in an unlocked cabinet. Forged signatures, altered timestamps, planted discrepancies. It was sloppier than he expected. Arrogance had made them careless. He photographed everything. Back in his penthouse that evening, Alexander stared at his reflection in the mirror. The disguise lay folded on the bed. He removed the uneven beard, washed his face, and dressed in a simple black shirt. For the first time since this began, he looked like himself again. But he felt changed, humbled, human. He drafted a message to Amara, then deleted it, then drafted another, deleted. Finally, he typed, "Tomorrow everything changes. Please trust me." He didn't send it. Trust, he knew, was fragile. The night before the board meeting, Alexander sat alone in the darkened living room, city lights flickering beyond the glass. He thought of his father. Character matters more than competence. He thought of Amara, goodness standing alone. Tomorrow the masks would fall, and when they did, he might lose her forever. But if he stayed silent any longer, he would lose himself. Alexander Kingsley closed his eyes and waited for morning. The boardroom of Kingsley Crown Bank had never been this full. Executives sat stiff-backed around the long mahogany table, their suits immaculate, their expressions carefully neutral. Managers who rarely attended meetings of this level had been summoned urgently, and no one quite knew why. The air was thick with confusion and restrained arrogance. At the head of the table sat the acting CEO, clearing his throat repeatedly. "Let's keep this short," he said. "The owner's office requested this meeting, but we haven't received further details." A few people exchanged glances. James leaned back in his chair, confidence written all over him. Probably routine. Investors like drama. Soft laughter rippled around the table. They had no idea. Downstairs, near the service corridor, a cleaner pushed a trolley slowly toward the elevators. No one paid attention. They never did. Alexander Kingsley stepped into the elevator alone. The doors slid shut, sealing off the disguise he had worn for days. Inside, he straightened his posture. His shoulders squared, his eyes sharpened. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, he stepped out, and the cleaner ceased to exist. The boardroom doors opened without announcement. Conversation died instantly. Every head turned. The man who walked in wore a tailored charcoal suit, clean-shaven, commanding without effort. His presence shifted the room, like pressure before a storm. The acting CEO stood abruptly. "Sir?" Alexander Kingsley didn't answer immediately. He walked to the head of the table, placed his hands on the polished wood, and looked around slowly, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Some recognition flickered, some disbelief, some terror. "My name is Alexander Kingsley," he said calmly, "owner of Kingsley Crown Bank." Chairs scraped loudly as several people stood at once. "Sir!" Voices overlapped. "Good morning, sir." James remained seated, frozen. Alexander's gaze settled on him. "Please," Alexander said softly. "Sit. This won't take long." No one moved. "Sit," he repeated, firmer this time. They obeyed. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Alexander spoke again. "For the past 2 weeks, I have worked in this building as a cleaner." A sharp inhale moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. "You walked past me," he continued. "You insulted me. You ignored me. You stole from me." Faces drained of color. "I watched you accept bribes. I watched you extort customers. I watched you abuse junior staff and cleaners." James swallowed hard. "This bank was built to be a legacy," Alexander said. "Instead, you turned it into a marketplace of greed." He nodded toward the screen at the far end of the room. It flickered on. Videos played. Security footage. Audio recordings. Time-stamped transactions. A supervisor slipping money into her bag. A guard collecting bribes. James altering records. Are fabricating Amara's suspension. Gasps filled the room. Some executives covered their mouths. Others stared at the table. A few began to tremble. James stood suddenly. "Sir, this must be a misunderstanding." "Sit," Alexander said sharply. James sat. "You framed an honest employee," Alexander continued, his voice now cold. "Amara Bello." James opened his mouth. Alexander raised a hand. "She is not here to defend herself. She shouldn't have to." He turned to the acting CEO. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties." The man's face crumpled. Security officers entered the room. Names were called. One by one. Some cried. Some begged. Some tried to justify themselves. Alexander listened to none of it. "This is not punishment," he said. "This is consequence." When the room was nearly empty, Alexander sank into the chair at the head of the table. For the first time that morning, he looked tired. "Bring her," he said quietly. Amara Bello sat in a small HR office downstairs, unaware of the storm above her. She had been called that morning without explanation. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers tightly interlocked. She felt sick. When the door opened, she braced herself. Instead, a young assistant smiled nervously. "Please follow me, ma'am." They led her to the executive floor. The boardroom doors opened. She stepped inside and froze. Alexander Kingsley stood near the window, not in rags, not with a broom, but in power. Her mind rejected what her eyes saw. "No," she whispered. He turned. Their eyes met. The silence stretched painfully. "You?" she asked, voice shaking. "You were the cleaner?" "Yes." Her breath hitched. "You lied to me." "Yes." She took a step back, tears burning. "You watched them destroy me. I stopped it. After it happened." Her voice cracked. Alexander walked toward her slowly. "I had to see the truth. And I saw it. Through you." She laughed bitterly. "So I was a test?" "No," he said urgently. "You were the answer." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I trusted you. And I love you," he said. The words fell heavy. "I didn't mean to," he added softly. "But I do." She shook her head. "You don't get to decide when love is convenient." The room felt too small. Alexander nodded slowly. "You're right." He stepped back. "I won't ask you for forgiveness today. He turned to the board. Reinstate Amara Bello with full benefits, public apology, and triple compensation. He looked back at her, and then let her decide. Amara left without another word. Alexander watched her go, unsure if he had won or lost. The bank was clean now, but his heart, that would take more work. The news broke before noon. Kingsley Crown Bank trended across every platform. Television, radio, blogs, whispered conversations in buses and offices. Headlines screamed variations of the same unbelievable story. Billionaire poses as cleaner, exposes corrupt staff. Footage leaked. Names circulated. Opinions clashed. Some hailed Alexander Kingsley as a genius. Others called him manipulative. Most were simply stunned. Inside the bank, silence replaced arrogance. Desks were empty. Offices locked. Confidence erased. Alexander walked through the halls now openly, dressed as the owner, flanked by security. But the power felt heavier than before. Every step echoed with memory of insults endured, kindness offered, love found under false identity, and love lost. Amara shut out the noise by turning off her phone. She stayed in her small apartment that first day, sitting on the edge of her bed, replaying everything again and again. The cleaner's smile, his quiet support, the way he listened, and the lie. It wasn't just that he was rich. It was that he had watched her suffer, knowing he could stop it, and waited. She pressed her palm to her chest, trying to calm the ache. When the bank called to formally reinstate her, she let it ring. When HR sent a public apology email, she didn't open it. When a journalist somehow got her number, she blocked it. She didn't want justice. She wanted peace. At the bank, Alexander held a staff assembly. "I don't expect applause," he said firmly. "I expect change." He restructured departments, introduced anonymous reporting, appointed external auditors, raised wages for junior staff and cleaners. Yet nothing he did quieted the single thought pounding in his head. She walked away. 3 days later, Alexander stood outside the charity center again. This time he didn't hide. He walked in openly. Amara saw him from across the room and froze. The children noticed first. "Uncle Alex!" They ran to him. He knelt, smiling, greeting them warmly. Amara watched, conflicted. When the room emptied, she approached him slowly. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I needed to see you as myself." She folded her arms. "Now I know who you are. Congratulations." He winced. "That's not fair." "No," she said quietly. "What's unfair is pretending to be powerless while watching others be crushed." Her words cut deep. "I thought exposing them would fix everything," he admitted. "I didn't realize it would break you." She softened just a little. "You didn't break me," she said. "You just reminded me how lonely doing right can be." They sat. No touching, no smiles, just truth. That night, Amara dreamed of marble floors cracking beneath her feet. She woke up crying. The next morning, she returned the bank's call. "I'll come back," she said. "On my terms." Her return was quiet. No celebration, no speeches. Some staff avoided her. Others whispered apologies. She ignored all of it. Alexander stayed away. He let her breathe. Weeks passed. The storm calmed, but something shifted. Amara noticed the cleaners were treated better. The guards stopped asking for something small. The systems worked. It was better. Still, when she thought of Alexander, her heart tightened. One afternoon, she found an envelope on her desk. No letterhead, just her name. Inside was a handwritten note. "I didn't deserve your trust. I don't expect your love. But I will spend the rest of my life being the man you believed I was." She folded it carefully, didn't respond. The bank hosted a small charity fundraiser a month later. Amara attended reluctantly. Alexander saw her across the room. Their eyes met. This time she didn't look away. Later that night, they stood on the balcony overlooking the city. "I'm not ready," she said. "I know, but I see the change. That's all I can offer." She turned to him. "If this works, It won't be because you're powerful. He smiled sadly. It will be because you're brave. She didn't answer, but she didn't leave. Lagos had a way of never letting a story die. Weeks after the scandal, Kingsley Crown Bank was still a case study, debated on morning radio shows, dissected in business columns, whispered about in church foyers and roadside salons. The name Alexander Kingsley carried even more weight now, not just for his wealth but for the risk he had taken. But for Alexander himself, the noise had faded into the background. The only opinion that mattered had never returned his calls. Amara. At the bank, things had changed, truly changed. Not just cosmetically. Cleaners were greeted by name. Junior staff spoke without fear. Supervisors treaded carefully. Systems were transparent now. Brutally so. Yet Amara kept her distance. She was professional, polite, untouchable. Alexander respected it. He forced himself not to hover, not to influence, not to make gestures that looked like compensation instead of sincerity. If there was any chance of earning her trust back, it had to be clean. Then the board proposed something that tested him. A Global Banking Award nomination. Your story is powerful, the PR director said excitedly. Integrity, leadership, redemption. Alexander stared at the proposal in silence. They wanted him on stage. With Amara. She's the symbol, someone added. The honest teller. The room went quiet. Alexander's jaw tightened. No, he said firmly. They stared. I will not turn her pain into marketing. That decision cost him points. It gained him peace. 2 days later, Amara received an invitation. She stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half. Then she sighed. Running wouldn't heal anything. The invitation was reissued, this time with a personal note from Alexander. If you come, it will not be for them. It will not be for me. It will be for the truth. She didn't reply, but she showed up. The hall was packed, media, executives, dignitaries. When Alexander stepped onto the stage, applause erupted. He raised a hand. Please, he said, let me speak first. The room stilled. This award, he said slowly, is undeserved. Murmurs rippled. I did something clever, yes, but cleverness isn't integrity. Integrity belongs to those who act rightly even when it costs them everything. His eyes searched the room, then found her. Amara stood near the back, simple dress, calm face. He gestured. Please come forward. She hesitated, then walked. The room watched, breath held. Alexander stepped away from the podium and handed her the microphone. This bank exists today because she refused to lie, he said. Because she chose principle over comfort. Amara's hands trembled. She hadn't planned to speak. She looked at Alexander. He nodded. She took a breath. I didn't do anything heroic, she said softly. I just didn't want to become someone I couldn't respect. The room erupted in applause. Amara handed the microphone back and turned to leave. Alexander stopped her, not by touching her, but by speaking. Amara, he said quietly. Thank you. She paused, looked at him, then nodded. That nod did more to heal him than any applause ever could. Later that evening, on the empty terrace, Alexander found her again. You didn't have to do that, she said. I did, he replied. Not as your boss. As a man who wronged you. She studied him. You're learning, she said finally. He smiled faintly. I'm trying. She leaned against the railing, looking out over the city lights. I was angry, she admitted. Not because you were rich, but because you chose control over trust. He nodded. I thought control was protection. And I thought honesty was enough, she replied. They stood in silence. Then she turned to him. If this, whatever this is, works, it has to be equal. His heart pounded. No power, she continued. No tests. No performances. He met her gaze. Just truth. She nodded. Just truth. The final test came quietly. A rival bank offered Amara a senior position. Double the pay, prestige, distance from Alexander. Alexander found out by accident. He didn't interfere. Didn't counter. Didn't persuade. He waited. When she told him, days later, her eyes searched his face. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. He swallowed. "I want you to choose what gives you peace." She smiled softly. "I already did." The morning Alexander Kingsley proposed was nothing like the world expected. There were no cameras, no helicopters, no headlines waiting to be written. Just a quiet garden behind a small community center, the kind of place most billionaires never noticed. The same place where Amara Bello still volunteered on weekends. Alexander arrived early, dressed simply, no suit, no designer watch. He wore a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and dark trousers. He helped set up chairs for a literacy program, his hands dusty, his movements unremarkable. No one recognized him, and for once that was exactly how he wanted it. When Amara arrived, she stopped short. "You didn't tell me you'd be here today," she said, surprised. He smiled. "I wanted it to be normal." She laughed softly. "Nothing about you is normal." "Not today," he replied. "Today I'm just Alex." Something in his tone made her pause. They worked side by side for hours, teaching children to read, handing out books, laughing at small mistakes. Alexander watched Amara in her element, fully herself, unguarded. This was the woman he had fallen in love with. Not the teller, not the symbol, the person. When the children finally left and the sun dipped lower, Alexander asked her to take a walk with him. They wandered through the small garden, quiet and green, the noise of the city distant. "I've been thinking," Amara said, "about how strange life is." He nodded. "It's humbling." She stopped walking and turned to him. "You didn't ask me to stay at the bank." "No," he said softly. "I wanted you to stay because you chose to." She smiled. "I did." His heart skipped. They sat on a bench beneath a wide mango tree. Alexander took a breath. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked at him carefully. "That sounds serious." "It is." He reached into his pocket. Her breath caught. But instead of a ring, he pulled out the faded cleaner's ID badge, the one he had worn during his disguise. He placed it between them. "This was the first time anyone loved me for who I was," he said quietly. "Or at least who they thought I was." Her eyes softened. "And this," he continued, pulling out his bank ID, "was who I thought I had to be to matter." He said it beside the first. "Neither of them is enough," he said. "But together, they taught me how to be honest." He turned to her fully. "I don't want to lead you. I don't want to test you. I don't want to impress you." He swallowed. "I want to walk beside you." Then he reached into his pocket again. This time it was a ring, simple, elegant, unpretentious. He didn't kneel immediately. He waited. "Amara Bello," he said, voice steady but eyes vulnerable. "Will you choose me? Not as a billionaire, not as a cleaner, but as a man still learning how to love rightly?" Silence filled the space between them. She looked at the ring, then at the ID badges, then at him. "I was angry for a long time," she said softly, "because I thought love had tricked me." He nodded. "You were right to be. But love didn't lie," she continued. "People did." Her eyes glistened. "You came back without the mask." He nodded again. She smiled. "That's enough for me." Alexander knelt then, heart pounding, breath caught. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." They didn't announce the engagement publicly. Not at first. They told the children at the center before anyone else. The joy was loud, unfiltered, pure. Months later, Kingsley Crown Bank became a model institution, not because of Alexander's wealth, but because of its culture. Whistleblowers were protected. Cleaners were promoted. Integrity became policy, not slogan. Amara eventually left her teller position, not because she was pushed, but because she was called. She started a foundation focused on ethical banking education and worker protection. Alexander supported it quietly, as a partner, not a benefactor. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly. No sirens, no press vans, no frantic phone calls. Just sunlight slipping gently through white curtains and the distant sound of birds waking the city. Amara Bello sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap, breathing slowly. Her apartment was filled with women, her mother, now healthier and stronger than she had been years ago, a few close friends from the bank, volunteers from the community center who had become family. There were no stylists shouting instructions. No gowns worth more than houses. Just laughter, soft music, and peace. Her wedding dress hung near the window, simple, elegant, ivory. No heavy embroidery, no dramatic train. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to feel like her. Her mother stood behind her, gently adjusting Amara's hair. "You look calm," her mother said softly. Amara smiled. "I am." Her mother studied her face for a long moment. "You trust him?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," Amara replied. "Not because he's perfect, but because he learned how to listen." Her mother nodded, eyes shining. "That's rarer than riches." Across the city, Alexander Kingsley stood alone in a quiet room, adjusting the cuffs of his plain charcoal suit. No designer labels, no family crest, just clean lines and intention. On the table beside him lay two objects, the cleaner's ID badge and the bank owner's card. He picked them up, one in each hand. Years ago, he had believed power was something you protected. Now he understood it was something you surrendered. He placed both cards into a small wooden box and closed it gently. Today, he wasn't the owner of a bank. He was a man choosing a woman. The ceremony took place in the garden behind the community center, the same one where children learned to read, where Amara had found purpose after betrayal, where Alexander had first knelt not as a billionaire, but as himself. White chairs were arranged beneath wide trees. Flowers, simple and wild, lined the path. Guests arrived quietly, many unaware they were witnessing the wedding of one of the wealthiest men in the country. No one was checked by security. No one was judged by appearance. Cleaners sat beside executives, teachers beside drivers, bank staff beside street vendors. It was intentional. When the music began, the crowd rose. Amara walked slowly down the path, her steps steady, her heart full. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't performing. Alexander stood at the front, breath caught in his chest. For a moment, the world narrowed to just her. The woman who had seen him when he had nothing to offer but honesty. The woman who had walked away when truth was delayed. The woman who had returned, not because she needed him, but because she chose him. When she reached him, he took her hands. They were warm, real. The officiant spoke briefly. "This is not a union of status," he said. "It is a union of character." No speeches followed. No long sermons. Just vows. Alexander went first. "I once believed my worth was measured by what I controlled," he said, voice steady. "But you taught me that love is not power. It's permission." He swallowed. "I promise to never test you. To never hide behind silence. To choose truth, even when it costs me comfort." He smiled softly. "I promise to walk beside you, not ahead of you, and never behind you." Amara's eyes glistened. She took a breath. "I promise," she said, "to keep choosing goodness even when it's lonely." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. "I promise to speak when silence is easier, to forgive without forgetting myself, and to love you not for what you can give, but for who you are becoming." She squeezed his hands. "I choose you." Freely. There was no dramatic pause, no hesitation, just certainty. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm, earned. Children clapped loudly. Someone laughed. Someone cried. Alexander kissed Amara gently, reverently. Not like a man claiming something, but like a man grateful for a gift. The reception was held under the same trees. Food was shared freely. Music played softly. No seating charts. No hierarchy. Alexander noticed something that made his throat tighten. The cleaners from the bank laughed freely. The junior staff spoke openly. No one looked afraid. No one felt small. Amara caught his gaze from across the garden and smiled. He nodded. This was what legacy looked like. Later, as the sun dipped low and lanterns glowed softly, Amara and Alexander stepped away from the crowd. They stood beneath the mango tree where he had proposed. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. She leaned into him. "Yes. Even knowing the road ahead won't be simple?" She laughed softly. "Especially because of that." He exhaled, resting his forehead against hers. "For the first time," he said, "I'm not afraid of being seen." She smiled. "Good, because I see you." As night settled, the guests slowly drifted away. The children hugged them goodbye. The garden emptied, but the peace remained. Alexander took Amara's hand. "Ready?" he asked. She squeezed back. "Always." They walked away together, not into grandeur, not into perfection, but into a life built on something far stronger. Truth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.